So this is the first Endurance podcast. We're going to introduce the presenters, which is myself, Dr. Tom Kirk, and Dr. Tim Podlogar. We're going to go into both of our backgrounds a little bit, and then Tim's going to go into a bit more detail into his latest research and how that can be applied in a practical situation for athletes. Okay. So firstly, myself, I'm Tom Kirk. I run a coaching company called Custom Cycle Coaching, and I have a background in cycling as an athlete and then a coach, and I've studied sports nutrition and completed my PhD a while ago now, before going into more working with athletes side of things. I first met Tim a few years ago. I'm based in Birmingham in the UK, and Tim was here doing his PhD and looking for guinea pigs, and having known what it's like in the past, how it can be quite difficult to find willing or not so willing subjects to do your research, I kind of felt happy to join in and take part in some of his research. So yeah, Tim, tell us a bit about yourself and your background.
Hey Tom, nice to meet you here online, and I'm really excited for this podcast series to start. Basically, the story, my story about sports nutrition actually started pretty much in Birmingham after leaving Slovenia, and then I started my PhD here. And Birmingham University is like very renowned university for sports sciences, especially sports nutrition. And then basically I fell in love here. After completing my PhD here, I moved back to Slovenia for a year and a half, spent some time doing some research and also some lecturing at Slovenian institutes, and then moved back to Birmingham to do some more cool stuff in the labs. And really, like, your study that you participated in, that was probably one of the most horrendous studies you can ever do.
It was pretty not so much in terms of being invasive with lots of muscle biopsies and everything, but it was quite a hardcore protocol. You were pretty wiped out by the end of it. I remember riding up the hill back to my part of town, up past the park, and I saw a cyclist I know who was in his car looking to pull out the road, and I saw him a couple of days later, and he said, "What had you been doing? That's the most exhausted I've ever seen you looking, riding back up this hill in my bottom gear, barely making it home." It was quite hard, yeah.
So yeah, a little bit of a background to what we were doing. It was a glycogen depletion on the first day of the experiment. So basically that meant riding the bike until you could not go further in intensity. And then, because I really like to see people suffer, I didn't really give them much food. As a matter of fact, they got 20 grams of protein and then some placebo, which was like basically water with some sweeteners. And I told them that they're getting calories, but obviously they were not. So they got home. Tom apparently was riding home, and it was pretty hard. And the next morning they had to come in and do another training session, which was 1 hour of steady state, and during which they perhaps got the carbohydrates or not, and 40 minutes approximately of a time trial, which was probably pretty tough. I've done the study myself, and yeah, it was exhaustive.
Yeah, I don't think it was the fastest or the best power output either of would have done on the bike that time trial. And now you've reminded me, I remember those protein gels as well. They were horrible. They were probably the second worst part of the study, having those protein gels. They were disgusting.
manufacturer doesn't manufacture them anymore.
Good choice.
Nobody liked them, and perhaps it was only me buying them for the study.
Not quite enough to keep them afloat with them. Yeah. So that was your the first part of your study, but you did give us some carbohydrates on one of the trials, didn't you?
Yeah, it was in one trial. It was carbohydrates, and what we were actually looking was into delayed carbohydrate feeding in a glycogen depleted state, because there were some suggestions in the past that if you do training sessions when you're like in low glycogen state, meaning very tired and very fatigued muscles and no glycogen in the liver, then you can potentiate adaptations. But the problem of this approach is obviously that you're tired and you can't do much work on the bike. And as you know, and we all know, like training volume is super important. So my idea was basically, let's see if delayed carbohydrate feeding, so like introducing carbs like half an hour into the exercise, would actually help. And yeah, it's kind of did help in a way, because like normal blood glucose levels is like around 5 millimoles. And when people got no carbohydrates, basically the blood glucose levels dropped to like 2.5, 3 millimoles. So like they were barely alive, including your.
That might be why my recollection of it's a little bit hazy. The low blood sugar I was experiencing at the time.
Yeah, so this was one of the things we were doing. And then the next study you also, I think, took part, which was the recovery study, which was about whether addition of fructose in the recovery period actually improves the recovery and then performance of the next training session, which was more like glycogen depletion. Again, all my studies involved had glycogen depletions. And then it was 4 hours of recovery during which people were drinking sugary water. So sugars dissolved in water, no taste whatsoever, no salt, no acid, nothing. And then 1 hour of steady state, and again a time trial. And that was pretty horrible as well. 2 very hard training sessions. Unfortunately, in that study, we didn't find any differences between fructose and glucose for various reasons that we can probably dive in one of the future episodes. But so basically all my studies, and everybody knows it, are super tough for the participants.
So how about your latest ones? Are they still just as difficult? I think I avoided the one where I had to donate a bit of leg. There was a biopsy one, wasn't there? You did in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean, currently I'm basically waiting to start my study here in Birmingham. I've completed some of the studies back in Slovenia with the help of the guys guys from Human Performance Center. This is a lab in Slovenia that I co-own. And yeah, we did some work there. The work is going to come out pretty soon, I hope. Very exciting news ahead. But the study that I'm currently designing or basically working on is, it's even more horrible probably, because it involves biopsies and it involves cycling in the heat chamber for 9 days in a row.
Hopefully I'll be too old for it by the time that comes around.
I think you are too old, yeah.
Never been so happy to be too old for something. So we'll have to rope some other people in, see if Luke will do it, or some other cycling buddies around here. Cool. So you're not actually in the lab at the moment, but just busy designing things. You've got a lot of fingers in other pies, as we say, as well. So what does your typical day look like at the moment? What do you do?
So yeah, I'm pretty busy, and for some reason I'm working from like early morning till late afternoon, because I'm not just employed by the university, or basically that's my primary employment, but I also work in my spare time. I work for NDURANZ, obviously, trying to like come up with new ideas for new products to improve performance of athletes. But I also work very closely with numerous athletes. I work for one of the World Tour cycling teams and some private athletes. So this is also like something that I really like because I can connect all the dots of the science in the lab. Then I work with athletes in the real time, and I also kind of work with a manufacturer so that I can actually have everything under control, basically, and connect all the dots and really see what works, what doesn't. This keeps me very busy. So basically, I usually wake up, or that's basically a standard at 5 a.m. And then I either jump on the bike straight away and do my training session indoors. I do most of the training sessions indoors, and then go to work, and then I just work for the rest of the day, pretty much. Or I go to work early. I'm in the office at 6 a.m. and then come home to do my training session, and then work until the evening again. Because it's like working with athletes is pretty much like all day stuff, because you need to kind of respond to messages, advise them. It's about looking at the food plates and saying, well, here you're missing some protein, or here is too much fat, or perhaps you should have more carbohydrates here because it's a hard day coming up. So these kind of things, that occupies my day, basically.
Yeah, so luckily, I guess you get to do a bit of that whilst you're sat on the turbo trainer, answering emails and looking at athletes' bowls of food and seeing what's in them and saying, add a few more spoonfuls of rice on there and the like.
Yeah, it's like probably I'm one of the guys that really spends loads of time on the bike indoors. I usually train on average probably 15 hours a week, and I only go outside if it's a really nice weather on Saturday and Sunday. So basically I do 8 to 10 hours on average probably indoors. I'm most of the time on the phone, either on Instagram, chatting about nutrition and science, or basically trying to spend the time very productively, I guess.
Yeah. You're pretty prolific on Instagram, aren't you? And you've got quite a good sort of social media following. It's pretty entertaining, some of your stories. Some of it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. Some of it's a bit... I mean, there was a spoof... kind of a spoof post last week or the week before, I think, wasn't there, where you outlined the nutritional strategy for one of the Bora guys in the Tour of the Alps that got quite a bit of interest. I guess that kind of highlights one of the problems maybe with the modern day social media sort of phenomenon. It's quite easy to spread that misinformation maybe. Do you see that a lot? What were the kind of reactions you got from that post?
It got out of control basically. So I was really surprised. So basically what happened and what I did was I just rejoined Instagram. So I had an Instagram account that I've been working on for years with plenty of followers, and I simply got blocked because I was violating the terms and conditions of Instagram, because I was probably an influencer with a bad influence. So I got blocked, and I couldn't recover the account, so I did a new one. And I didn't have a lot of followers. But just for fun, I posted one morning, just a random morning, a nutritional plan for one of our riders in the team to Instagram. Basically, that morning I created 2 plans. One plan that I sent to the rider, and the other one that I posted on Instagram. And the one on Instagram involved the rider eating hazelnuts on the bike, and omega-3 shots, and some L-carnitine, and ketones, and galactose, and D-ribose, and just stupid stuff that I would never recommend to any athlete.
There was no Haribo at all, so you knew it was wrong.
Basically, that was super obvious, right? And then that guy won. So, so I posted this plan to Twitter because I have a larger group of followers there. And basically what happened was numerous nutritionists reshared this post, and people started talking. So stats on the Twitter says that the tweet has been seen by 65,000 people. So it went like crazy. And people started asking questions. Even the team got asked by journalists what was going on and what the strategy was about. So the next morning when I woke up, I saw that it completely got out of control, and people did not realize that it was actually fake.
Yeah.
And actually just for fun. And basically, I needed to initiate a kind of apology or an explanation. And what I was trying to actually show was that what you see on social networks, even if it is coming from professional cycling teams or professional people for free, might not be true. So what you see in social networks, you should never take for granted. And you always have to think what you see, because it can be forced, it can be aimed to deceive you, to make you think something has been done, but it hasn't. And as you can imagine, why would I share a plan with wide audience if I want my athletes to actually win?
To have an advantage, yeah, for sure.
So all the information that gets leaked can be intentionally leaked, and that's what I wanted to show the world and to make them think. I thought that it would be so obvious that they would just get the take-home message, but obviously they didn't. So
I remember seeing it and thinking, that's another one of Tim's funny little jokey posts there, and not sort of thinking it would go quite as viral as it did. I guess the problem it highlights the problem of that misinformation, but also it's another example would be you publish the sort of the retraction, the explanation afterwards, but I guess that I'm sure that hasn't been seen as many times. It's not been got as much interest as the original fake data. So there's probably people who've been misled from that, and maybe they're chomping away on the hazelnuts now and missing out through that. So it's a really good example of be careful what you read and be careful what you listen to.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really, really important. This is something I really try to put forward, kind of trust only, basically trust nobody, question yourself. I question myself daily. That drives me forward. Am I doing this right? Is there another explanation? And I'm really happy to say, well, I'm wrong. I was wrong. And let's move on. Let's improve. I think this is the best we can do. As a scientist, that's my main task. But even as a practitioner, I have to sometimes say to my athletes, well, I admit I did something wrong, or some new information came out, and let's change the strategy. As simple as that. So
and that's how anything evolves, isn't it? In the scientific community, 10, 20, 30 years ago, have very different thoughts to what we do now. And maybe there's a little bit of resistance to change in the first place, but that's how you see, in our case, nutritional strategies evolve from people having a steak before a Tour de France stage 20, 30 years ago to more modern, very involved, very simple, but also high-tech nutritional planning like you do with professional riders. So I guess a good example of that is sort of how the way the carbohydrate guidelines have changed over the years. I remember some of the research from Birmingham in the past looking at how you could use a 2-to-1 ratio, for example, of glucose and fructose containing drinks, and sort of that led to the idea that you could have a higher carbohydrate intake with different combinations of sugars. And then more recent research suggests it's more like a 1-to-1, a 1 to 0.8 ratio, like we're using in endurance. And you were quite a strong sort of, you pushed that quite strongly, didn't you? Sort of, how did how did you influence really the composition of the mix and of the endurance mix?
Yeah, it was kind of like interesting, because when I started being interested in the products was because I was cyclist myself, and obviously I was doing PhD in sports nutrition at the time, and I was basically studying in one of the best universities in the field, and I very soon picked up that basically 2-to-1 ratio is not the ratio that should be recommended, that it's optimal, but it's actually more like 1-to-1 or 1.1 to 1 to 0.8, which now Endurance has and many other brands. And there has been like loads of research indicating that that's the best ratio, but there were no manufacturers at all at the time actually using that ratio. So, well, I started thinking, well, what can I do? And I chatted with my supervisor at the time, and he was like, well, you can do your own gels. And I was like, well, I can do my own gels. How? And he gave me some ideas. So I started experimenting on myself. And then at one point, I got in touch, or like people from Endurance got in touch and asked me, well, do you want to kind of help us or work together? Especially because like a few months earlier, I was very critical of their products. And I'm very like a person that very much likes to call someone that he doesn't know what he's doing, because if you're not like respecting the evidence, then you're probably nobody for me. And then I just say it loud without any troubles, and that's what I was doing. So basically, they got in touch and asked me whether I want to like work on this, and we started developing the products, and this is how like Endurance and the current product line was born, because the whole like product line is about this ratio, glucose and fructose, or maltodextrin and fructose, and this way we can actually minimize the gastrointestinal discomfort and also improve the efficiency of like using the ingested carbohydrates. And there are so many misconceptions out there. I was just reading a blog post from one of the manufacturers still doing the 2-to-1 ratio, and they were saying like, well, there is no evidence that 1 to 0.8 ratio is better. And I was like, well, you really don't understand the evidence, do you? And they just refuse to change. And many manufacturers refused to change for years, and then suddenly there was a need to change, because like some of the nutritionists from professional cycling teams demanded the change, because they actually were reading the literature. So now quite a few brands use this ratio after probably, I don't know, seeing us doing or using this ratio. And it's been a success, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess you kind of had a bit of a head start in that, maybe with it being a Slovenian brand, and you being a bit more aware of it than many other people would be. So you got in early there with Endurance and influenced their composition, and then that's gone on then really to affect how other maybe more well-known companies, certainly well-known in the UK, have changed their compositions for that. It's interesting you say about the other manufacturers sort of still pushing the 2-to-1 as being optimal. I remember a few weeks ago seeing I think an Instagram post by a British cyclist saying, thanks to the sponsors for providing him with his latest products, and he was kind of implying that he'd be taking on 120 grams per hour by having a bottle of this drink and one of their gels per hour, and they're one of the brands that still does use the 2-to-1 ratio. So I mean, maybe that might not be optimal for him for a few reasons, I guess, but I mean, what kind of issues do you think he might have experienced if he did try and take on 120 grams an hour through those products?
Yeah, like this 120 grams per hour, this debate is really has heated up recently, because just a study has been published like showing that actually you can utilize 120, or at least like very high, utilize a big proportion of these 120 grams if you ingest 1 to 0.8 ratio of carbohydrates. But the problem of all this data in these very high doses is they never actually compare the glycogen use with other doses. And if you think about it, you only want to increase the carbohydrate intake so that you suppress the amount of glycogen you're using, or you're doing nothing good, basically. And we really need a study comparing 90 versus 120 in the first place to actually see if there is glycogen sparing occurring or not. As a matter of fact, I have this data on my computer. I can't share them with you now because the study hasn't been published yet, but it's going to be really interesting going forward. But to go back to the question, so what can 2-to-1 ratio do if you ingest it at really high rates? So there is a really cool study from years ago by my supervisor, where he was giving women, so small people, let's say it's relatively low power output, either 30, 60, or 90 grams of carbohydrates. It was glucose only, though, but it kind of really represents what could happen here. And the study actually showed that with really high dose of ingested carbohydrates, muscle glycogen utilization actually went up. So completely the opposite of what you want to achieve with increased carbohydrate intake. So I think we have to be really careful what we do with these ingestion rates, because I think we should really always have in mind this study, because if you go too much with carbohydrates, too high, we might end up actually using more glycogen. And also something that people do not understand is that there is a difference between the tolerance, so what you actually tolerate, and basically I can probably eat 200 grams or 300 grams of Haribo in one go, but the question is, can I actually utilize those carbohydrates? There is a big difference between utilization and actually tolerance. And then we have this question about the glycogen use. So I think everything is way more complicated than what people are presenting. And in my personal view, going with 90 grams or even 60 grams for less trained athletes per hour is the optimal dose, and you don't need to go higher. And I think the nutrition the day before the race or the event or the training session plays a much bigger role than the nutrition during the session itself.
So the glycogen availability is still the king, essentially, and then what you're taking on during the race or during the training session is a secondary importance. It's kind of, to use a term, that's kind of the more marginal gain. You're getting the main gain from your overall diet, especially in the day or two before the race or the training session.
You're kind of trying to rescue because people think, well, I'm going to fuel well during the training session, so I can forget about the nutrition before. So I'm just you're trying to kill the fire. Whereas basically, you should be paying more attention to the diet before a training session. And we all know, and I think this is pretty standard exercise physiology knowledge, that glycogen is more efficient fuel than glucose. And basically, we should be aiming and trying to have as much glycogen available before the start of the intense session rather than as much glucose during the session. It doesn't really make sense. And also, if we are risking gastrointestinal discomfort because we are ingesting large amounts of carbohydrates, this is just not a strategy that I would recommend.
So rather than focusing on taking 120 grams an hour during the event, but you might have only 300 grams of muscle glycogen rather than 600 or so grams if you've got a suboptimal diet beforehand, and that's the big gain to be had overall with the diet there.
Yeah, exactly. Even if you think about, let's do some maths. So if you do a 3-hour long training session and then you ingest 120 grams per hour, which comes out as 360 grams of carbohydrates. So if you're in calorie balance, this means that you have to take away some of these carbohydrates the day before or just before a training session, meaning that you will end up with less glycogen for certain. That's basically like simple maths. And if you're like, instead of going like 60 grams per hour, which would be like then 180 grams, so you're missing up 180 grams of carbohydrates that you could have the day before to really fill up the glycogen stores. And you didn't have those, so you didn't have the energy. And then you failed the workout, basically. You probably, as a coach, see very often that like sometimes athletes are just probably under fueling, so they don't manage like intense workouts. Or
I mean, definitely that can be a big problem, and it could be something that definitely it's a session that someone could complete, that they do it fine one week, and then the next week they've not been able to do it so well, and they say, oh yeah, but I didn't have much time for breakfast, or didn't eat very well the night before, or various factors, you think, oh well, that explains why you can do it one week and then next week you're struggling with the same session essentially that you should be able to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is kind of something that really people really need to think. So like what's coming in and think in advance, and then be sensible with carbohydrate intake during exercise. I think like Belgium classics, which are like 6 hours long, it makes sense. You need to do a glycogen loading, a proper one, to fill up the glycogen stores, and then fuel probably plenty during the session, and you will still end up in a caloric deficit. But for normal or ordinary people whose power output is much lower, the energy turnover is much lower as a result, this just doesn't make sense. This is something people should think about.
Think about the energy demands and the carbohydrate demands of the event first of all, and adapt it based on that. And that's what I mean, in a non-spoof nutritional plan for your riders, that's what you'd be doing as well. I guess you'd be fueling a short flat sprinter stage very differently to a 6 hour classic or a mountain stage in a big stage race.
Yeah. So I always try to look what's coming up rather than what just happened. So what was the training session like? I don't really care about that. I really care about what the training session that is coming up is about, because you are basically fueling for that one, not for the previous one. So that's probably my take home message. Always think ahead, and glycogen is more important than carbohydrate ingestion during exercise. And that would be my advice, a very simple one.
Great. So looking ahead, sort of we've talked about your research, and you've got some stuff that's about to start that you can't tell us too much about. Have you got anything working with endurance, any new items in development there you can tell us about?
Yeah, probably. I think they won't mind. So what I really want, and what we are probably missing from the lineup currently, is 90 grams of carbs in the bottle. We currently have energy unit that is 45, but I wanted to have 90 grams for instance, if you're doing a criterium or something, and there is the only time when you can have carbohydrates is basically from the bottle, or you're training indoors or whatever. There are many occasions when you want very concentrated carbohydrate source, and this is I think a perfect solution. So we are just basically filling the gap there. The same with the same ratio, just a bit less electrolytes, so that we kind of minimize the risk of GI discomfort. This is probably the first product. The next product is, which is something I'm really excited about, is 45 grams of carbs, so the one energy unit, with bicarbonate instead of the normal electrolytes. And the reason for this is that there is some research, or plenty of research, actually showing that sodium bicarbonate can actually improve performance, really interval training sessions. And more recently, there have been some suggestions made that you can actually ingest bicarb during normal workouts as well, and increase even adaptations by doing that. And this is something we are currently working on, and it would just like be add-on for really high intense training sessions. The problem with sodium bicarb is that it's horrible. The taste is horrible. So we are really trying to make sure that the taste is not horrible. Because or people won't really like it. And I want it to be like something that you ingest and don't feel very bad after, or it won't help. So basically, these are probably two products that we are kind of working on. There are some others, many others, but maybe we can.
Those are the next ones in the pipeline. Yeah, so the bicarb one, would that be something that you would take just before a high intensity training session, or in a race situation, maybe take towards the end of the race in sort of preparation for the finish, or what are the quantities of bicarb we're talking about?
So it really depends on like the type of the race. So if it's like a UK style, which is like very short up and downs, so you have like a climb that lasts like 2-3 minutes, really sharp effort, this could actually be very helpful. For instance, if you're doing a mountain stage in the Alps, where the climb is like half an hour long or more, then probably this sodium bicarb won't help. But for like very short and very sharp efforts, it can be really helpful. So you would probably start up ideally with some of the bicarb at breakfast, like 10-15 grams, and then replace this normal energy unit drink with this buffer energy unit drink. And this way you can then basically top up the bicarbonate stores in the body and make it effective even late in exercise.
So is that something you'd alternate with the normal endurance with the electrolyte mix in it?
Yeah, I would probably then just use the buffer one for racing. If the race is like the structure of the race, or basically the parkour is such that someone would benefit from bicarb.
Okay, and for the endurance electrolyte mix as well is a little bit different to most of the products, isn't it? How did the composition of that come about? I mean, I remember showing my girlfriend the packet when I first got some, and I think it said human sweat based drink, which maybe isn't the snappiest title, but how did that come about?
I guess we were a bit clumsy with the title or the slogan. But when I was thinking, and when I started like all this like sports nutrition stuff, I was like very much not into electrolytes. And I was like, well, there is not a lot of evidence basically to suggest that electrolytes are useful. And then when I started looking what manufacturers were putting into the drinks were like magnesium. And I started thinking, well, do I really need magnesium? Is there any evidence that it helps against like muscle cramps? None whatsoever. So why do we need magnesium in there? So I asked myself a question: which electrolytes do I need during exercise, which make more sense? And basically, it's the ones that we are losing during exercise. So I took a look at the composition of like every sweat, which electrolytes we're using, and basically added this into the drink. So that's why it's human sweat-based isotonic, because it basically contains the electrolytes in the concentrations that you find in the sweat. So basically, by drinking it, you're basically replacing not only water, but also electrolyte that you're losing in the sweat. Obviously, sweat rates and the sweat composition varies between people, so it's not perfect. But for most people, it works pretty well. And because we are not adding a lot of magnesium, which you don't actually sweat at all, basically, pretty much, we were able to like kind of minimize like the gastrointestinal discomfort, because magnesium, people might not know it, is one of the biggest problems when it comes to GI distress, because electrolytes can actually draw the water from the blood into the intestines rather than another way around. And then this can then obviously cause the problem. So we don't want too many electrolytes in the drink. And we were really careful which electrolytes we put into the drinks, basically.
And that gastrointestinal distress is such an important factor, isn't it? I mean, someone I've fairly recently started coaching, obviously the racing's started around a month or two ago in the UK, and I was asking her what does she normally have nutrition wise during a race, and she was taking protein in her bottles because she didn't get on with any of the carbohydrate drinks she tried. She got gastrointestinal distress from them. So I said, get yourself some of this and try it, and she's been a very happy customer since. So it's one of those things that people might they might have tried a carbohydrate drink in the past, not got on with it, and then thought, oh well, I don't really get on it, maybe I'm just gonna have water, or I'm gonna, in this case, take protein instead because I'm getting a bit of calories from that, but it's not really what you need during a race or during a hard session. So yeah, I think that's one of the things to really one of the benefits I've seen from endurance compared to some of the other drinks. It goes down very well. Everyone seems to get on with it and not have any problems.
Yeah, I really don't like to promote the product. I just say that try it and then you see, because it's not that something that we invented. We just use the science that's available and it's out there. We put it to use. For instance, like some other manufacturers, what they do is basically take a look at what's popular. So for a longer time, fructose, for instance, was seen as a bad sugar. So nobody wanted to put fructose into the products because it's bad. We didn't care about that because there is no evidence for this. People added magnesium into the products because, magnesium is good for muscle cramps. Well, there is no evidence for that. So we just didn't put magnesium into the drinks and stuff like that. Or you can even see the products out there claiming that you have an isotonic drink without sugars because maltodextrin doesn't contain sugar. And what they then do to add the sweetness, they add sweeteners. So you have a maltodextrin drink with magnesium and added sweeteners. Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And yes, you see those decisions are just made because, I don't know, people like to see certain stuff in the products. This is not my approach. I always get science first. And if tomorrow we find out that there is something new, then I will the next day call Endurance and ask them, can we make this?
Stop the production. We've got something else on the horizon.
Yeah, it's always I'm always, every day reading studies, and then very often I come up with ideas. Could we do that? I don't know, pre-sleep protein or something like that, and then we see if it's feasible or not. Can we use slow release carbohydrates for this and that? And it's always thinking and trying out different things that come out in science, not on bro science websites.
And I guess that goes back to where we started talking about really with your research. I mean, you've got so many different interests. How do you manage to narrow that down when it comes to designing your studies? Does Gareth keep you on track with that and keep it quite narrowed, or do you go off on a lot of tangents?
Yeah, my boss is probably the best boss out there. I don't know if I could have a better boss in the uni. So it was actually pretty. We really, I think. We think alike, so we are really similar in the thinking. So for instance, yesterday it was pretty funny because we both saw a tweet on Twitter at the same time and message the same tweet to each other at exactly the same time. So I got a message and he got a message from me about the same thing with the same comment. So it was pretty funny to see that. And it kind of shows that, it's something that, I really get along with him. And he really encourages me to think out of the box and do projects that I like. Because I'm really passionate about science, and we opened a lab in Slovenia, and the first thing I started doing that, not earning money, which upset some of the people there, but I started doing studies. So in 18 months, we were able to do 5 studies, which I don't think anyone can do in such a small setup as we have, but we managed to do 5 studies. Pretty good.
Pretty prolific. A lot of hard work gone into that as well.
Basically, I just live for science.
Great. So, that's been a pretty interesting discussion. Great way to introduce the podcast, I think. I guess it's probably a good time to end it there, and we'll chat again next time.
Yeah, I can't wait. And I think we can probably get some questions answered if the listeners drop us down the messages.
That'd be brilliant. Send your messages in, and we'll see what we can deal with on the next episode.
Cool. So see you. Thanks for having me, Tom, and see you soon.
Thank you. It's been a great chat. It's flying by. Speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.